Welcome back. Welcome back to the fourth session of Destinaishions Kiruv training program. Thank you. Hope everyone had a great 2 weeks in yeshiva, and it's great to be back for the fourth of 8. Please note in your calendars, next session, Lefi Minyanam, is January 19th. We'll be starting 8:30, and we'll be using the same room, but like a few weeks ago when we used the entrance coming up right when you come in, there'll be a door you can go up the stairs, and we're going to come right in here, 8:30. And it could be that until further notice, we'll be starting 8:30 for the rest of the sessions, but at least for next session, Mitzvah Shem will be starting 8:30. We're very excited tonight to have two incredible sessions as part of the Aish Torah Kiruv training program tonight. We'll hear from Rav Moshe Zelman, who we're also going to hear from in the introduction to Kiruv, but tonight's a completely different class. It's titled Evidence of Hashem's Existence, and Rav Zelman will give three main points of evidence that indicate clearly the existence of Hashem. And these are things that you know for yourself, and machazik your own personal hashkafa, but more importantly as well, to be able to give over to others clearly. It's a big schus to have Rabbi Zalman. Last time I introduced him, I said that it was up to me, which it kind of is. I would have the entire program just for Zalman every week. And I say that again, that Rav Zalman is an unbelievable Kiruv expert, thousands of hours, traveling the world speaking. He is the Emunah rabbi that guys come to when they have sveikos, when they have doubts, spends hours with them, and it's a big honor and privilege to call upon Rav Moshe Zelman.
Okay, Shavua Tov. So before we get into details, I want to start with just a hakdama that the context of this program is Kiruv training, which means you can kind of imagine yourself, think of it like this. Imagine you're flying home at the end of this year, and you end up sitting beside a kid on a birthright program who's totally not religious, and he's sitting there beside you, and he sees you having your kosher meal and making your brachas and davening, and imagine this guy is like totally secular, and he says to you, like, you know, I see you're obviously kind of religious and you believe in all this Jewish stuff. I'm not. I was in Israel. It was a cool trip, but I don't really buy all this stuff. Why do you take this stuff seriously? How do you really know any of this stuff is actually true? So I'm just curious, how many of you would say, even just on what you've had so far from the program so far, plus whatever you knew before, how many of you feel that in a few hours of discussion you'd be comfortable convincing this person why Judaism actually makes sense, why they should take it seriously? By a show of hands, how many of you feel you could do it? Most of you not. Interesting. Okay? I'm hoping by the end of this whole series, you will, I hope tonight and the rest of the series, you'll have some good, strong evidence to give over. We're going to give one tonight. But before we get into it, you should realize this. As much as we could call this a class in how to prove Hashem's existence, you could also call it a class in Hilchos Emunah. Because Lamaisa, if you want to know how to keep Shabbos, there's a thing called Hilchos Shabbos. If you want to learn how to daven properly, and the halachas of Shachris Mincha Mariv, there's a thing called Hilchos Tefillah, and Hilchos Brachos, and Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, and Hilchos Tzitzis. So there's a thing called Hilchos Emunah. Now, Hilchos Emunah you don't find very clearly in Shulchan Aruch, but you find that all of the Rishonim deal very clearly with Hilchos Emunah. The Rambam, the Ramban, all the sources go through the Chinuch, go through the inyan of what Hilchos Emunah is. And the real halach of Emunah is to know, number one, that it's a chiyuv. It's not just a kiruv tactic, it's a chiyuv. There's a mitzvah called Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And according to the Rishonim, the mitzvah Anochi Hashem Elokecha, to know that there is a God, means you have to have evidence for yourself to know why believing in Hashem makes sense. And lefi all the Rishonim, and you can go all the way down the line, lefi all the Rishonim, everybody holds that you need at least some sort of rational, logical reason to believe in Hashem. Nobody says differently. Nobody says differently. In the Achronim, already by the Hasidim, there's a machlokas. Should you look into it? Should you have chakiras? And should you look into philosophy? It's a question in the Achronim. The Hasidim didn't hold by it in a big way. But l'chol l'deos in the Rishonim, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to know that Hashem exists. Which means, if I was to ask you why you believe in God, and your answer is, well, I was just raised this way, my friends believe it, my Rebbe believes it, I never thought about it too much, I just went through the system and kind of accepted it. lefi all the Rishonim, you're not yotze the mitzvah of Amunah. You're not being Makayim a mitzvah's aseh called Lahamin B'Hashem, or Leidashi Ish Hashem. So, as much as this is a good tactic that you're going to be able to use in terms of Kiruv, you really need it for yourselves as well. We should know, when we wake up in the morning, we say, Mo'od Ani Lefanecha, we should know why we believe in what we believe. Because the reality is, if the only reason you believe is because you were raised that way, it's what I think Rabbi Kane probably talked about a couple weeks ago, it's like social conditioning. If the only reason you believe it is because you were raised that way, then you really can't look at yourself differently than the guy across the street from you who's a Roman Catholic, or who's Buddhist, or who's an atheist, or who's a whatever, and say, you know what? They believe what they believe because that's how they were raised, and I believe what I believe because that's how I was raised. Maybe my whole basis of my Yiddishkeit, it's just an accident of where I happen to be born. So, l'chol deus in the Rishonim, as a halacha, there's a mitzvah aseh deraisa that's called to know that God exists. The Rambam says it beferish. The Rambam says, his first halacha, in Yesodei Torah, the Rambam says, Yesodei Yesodos, the foundation of all foundations. The Amud HaChochmos, the pillar of all wisdom, who leida, you have to know, sheyesh sham matzui rishon. You have to know that there's this first being that created us. If you don't know that, then you don't know there's a God. You're not being Yotzei the mitzvah Emunah. That's really where we're going to come from tonight. So I want to look all together at three different sources, three different mahalchim, and how we know God exists. I'll say it in a very simple lashon, in a way that you'll be able to describe it, again, to anybody else who's skeptical or who doesn't believe. I'll start with the simple one. The simple one goes like this. It's really the Gemara brings down this idea. The Rambam brings it in a number of places. I'll start with the Medrash, actually. The Medrash says that, the Medrash says by Avram Avinu. The Medrash says that Avram Avinu's way of being makir, that there's a Ribono Shel Olam. The Medrash says that Avram Avinu would walk through the forest. In the middle of the forest, he found a house, a biro dolekas, the Medrash says. A house that was lit up, a biro dolekas. And Avram Avinu says, if there's a bira, there's a Baal HaBira. If there's a house here, there must be somebody who owns or who made this house. And that was his hakar. There must be a Kodesh Baruch Hu in the world. Now, what is the Medrash really saying? It's saying, essentially, you walk through a forest with just random trees all over the place, and all of a sudden you find a house, even if it's made out of logs. Those logs probably didn't fall there by accident. If there's a house made out of logs, those logs didn't fall in sequence at the right angles to make a house by accident. Somebody must have chopped down trees, put them at the right angle, built them the right way, put the door in place, put the windows in place, put the roof in place to make a house. So the Midrash is saying a very simple idea. The Midrash is saying, wherever you find examples of design points to a designer. Design points to a designer. So I'll give you a mashal. Let's imagine, right, we finished class at 9:20. And you take a 5-minute break till Rabbi Seit comes. You're all outside for 5 minutes waiting for Rabbi Seit. You come back in after 5 minutes. And let's say we find that all of the papers and all the pens and pencils in the room are all stacked up neatly in the corner of this table. All the pens in a row, all the pencils in a row, and all the notepads all stacked up together. So you'd walk in here, you'd say, it's kind of weird. Like, why did Rabbi Rosen stack up all the notebooks here? Like, we've just gone for 5 minutes. Like, what's going on? So you're going to go find Rabbi Rosen, ask him why he did it. Meanwhile, a few of you start discussing it. So imagine your friend turns to you and says, you know, I don't think Rabbi Rosen did this at all. You know what I think happened? I think while we were out for those 5 minutes, I think the air conditioning system went nuts. And it was just blowing plumes of air very fast into the room. There was so much air blowing into this room, all the notebooks were flying around in the room randomly. And by accident, they just happened to land together in one corner of the table. Whole stack of notebooks, whole bunch of pens and pencils. So you look at your friend and say, you're crazy, man. Like, what have you been smoking? What are you talking about? Are you serious? And your friend says, listen, it could have happened, right? It's possible. You're right. It's a 1 in a quadrillion chance of happening by accident. But it could have happened. You can't prove it didn't happen. There's no video cameras here. We don't know for sure. It's possible Rabbi Rosen did it. It's also possible that the wind made it happen by accident. 1 in a quadrillion chance. Now the fact is you can't prove your friend wrong. None of us were here. We didn't see what happened. There's no videotape. We don't know. But what you'd say is, you're right. It could have happened by accident. But because the odds of it happening by accident are so slight, it's just a much more reasonable proposition to say that somebody stacked it up. It's not a proof. It's just a much more reasonable assumption to make. And we make reasonable assumptions like that all the time in day-to-day life. You see a design, you see a pattern, you assume the strength of the design tells you how strong of a proof it is, or how much evidence it is that there must be a designer behind it. Strong design, high likelihood of designer. Weak design, maybe it was an accident. So now all you have to do is apply that basic idea to the idea of design you see in the world. Okay? Give you another example. Let's imagine you're on a tiyul up north in the Galil, walking through a forest. And in the middle of a path, in the middle of the trees, you find a camera. A camera on the ground. You pick this thing up and say, wow, somebody left a camera here. And your friend says, no, I don't think so. What do you mean? There's a camera here. Somebody obviously left it. Your friend says, no, you know what I think happened maybe? Maybe there's a hurricane a few miles away from here. And there were lots of little bits of plastic and metal and glass flying around in the air, all kinds of bits and stuff, and they just happened to land together in the right sequence, in the right way, in the right order, and it made it into a functioning camera. Nobody actually created it. It wasn't designed. It's just there by accident. You look at your friend and say, you are nuts. Like, what are you talking about? There's a 1 in a quadrillion chance. 1 in a quintillion quadrillion chance. There's no way. Your friend says, there's a way. It's possible. You're right. It's very, 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 very unlikely, but it's possible. And again, you can't prove them wrong. It's just you find an example of a design like that. It's kind of crazy to think that it's not a designer who made it. So if you would look at a camera and say there must be a designer to the camera, then you should look at a human eye and be able to make the exact same statement. Because a human eye, every one of our eyes, is far more biologically complex than any camera you'll ever find. Your eye has 300 million rods and cones constantly adjusting inside the pupil and the retina so you can see and you can focus and depth of field. And visual processing. It goes to the cortex in the back of your mind. It forms an image. Your eye is really complicated. Your eye is so complicated that if, God forbid, your eye was poked out, you went to a doctor and said, I'll pay you for a new eye, like make me a new eye. They can't do that. They don't know how to make eyes. They don't know how. Doctors today do not know how to make a human eye. They can give you a glass eye for a few bucks. But an actual functioning eye, they don't know how to. You can just copy the old one. And just, no, we don't know how to do that. It's way too complex. So if I find a camera that has it and say there's no way it happened by accident, I should look at a human eye and say there's just no way it happened by accident. That's just an eye. What about your brain? What about your nervous system? What about your circulatory system? What about how your blood works? What about your lung and your kidneys? You look at a human being and say, like, this is an unbelievable example of design. Now, this is, it's a simple mahalik. It's a simple proof. There's a design. You see design. You stack of papers. Somebody must have done it. You look at a human being. It had to come from a designer. Now, that's a simple mahalik. If you were to approach this idea to any college student today, or anybody who's been exposed to the Western world, and say, listen, I can prove that there's a God, there's a design, so there's a designer. So what's your average Western person going to say in response? There's a one-word answer they will give you. It starts with an E. What's their answer going to be? Evolution. It happened by accident. Because you know what? We've been around for billions of years. It's called molecular biology. It's called cellular evolution. It's called random genetic mutations. It's called survival of the fittest. It's called natural selection. Right? There's all these words to describe that maybe evolution accounts for the design. The muscle that evolutionists use to prove this point, to demonstrate this point, the muscle that evolutionists use is this. They'd say, imagine if you had 1 million monkeys, and every monkey had a laptop, and you gave each monkey 1 million years to just bang away on the keys 24/7 for 1 million years. 1 million monkeys with 1 million keyboards for 1 million years. Would it surprise you that some monkey at some point, somewhere along the way, ends up typing out to be or not to be, and that is the question? He types out a line from Shakespeare. Would that shock anybody here? Law of averages. There's just so many monkeys doing so much typing for so long. By accident, somebody will type a T and then an O and then a space and then a B and then an E and then a space. There's so many monkeys happening over such a long period of time, it'll happen by accident. So the argument of evolution is, yeah, it looks amazing that we have these design called eyes and brains, but you know what? There's hundreds of billions of galaxies. The world's been around for billions of years. There's lots of room and lots of time and lots of space for accidental things to happen. We are just that, we are the sentence to be or not to be. We're the accident of evolution that just came out to be right. So it's not such a big deal. Give it enough time, give it enough space. accidents will happen. We're just the lucky accident that happened. It's not a proof of God. It's just an accident. Flip a coin long enough, you'll get 10 heads in a row. There's a 1 in 1,000 chance. Yeah, so flip it for a few thousand times and you'll get it. So if cells are dividing, and cells are mutating, and cells are passing on, and species are reproducing and passing on their genes to the next generation, and there's random mutations, blah, 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 blah. So eventually you'll have complexity. It'll just happen by accident. That's the argument of evolution. We can give a whole class on how to answer it. I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Okay? The simple answer to evolution goes like this. That the evolutionist's argument is it happened by accident. All you have to do is ask the evolutionist one question. Ask them one question. Lishitascha. According to you that this was by accident, what are the odds that it actually happened by accident? I can calculate what are the odds of a monkey typing out to be or not to be. The number of monkeys, the number of keys, the amount of time. You can actually make a calculation. There's a statistical calculation you make about the monkeys typing out the sentence. You should be able to make a statistical calculation. What are the odds of cellular life forming by accident? Given that the world's been around for 13 billion years, given the fact that science says there's hundreds of millions of galaxies, ask the evolutionist one question. What are the odds that somewhere, at some point in the history of the universe, cellular life started to form by accident? All the amino acids were just in the right place at the right time under the right conditions, and it actually created cells that were able to reproduce themselves. What are the odds? Lishitasam. What are the odds that could have happened by accident? So if you were to ask any modern-day evolutionist, Richard Dawkins, what's his name? The other famous guy, not coming to my mind right now, I'll come in a minute. There's a number of big evolutionists in the world that talk about this. According to them, Stephen Jay Gould, that's what I'm thinking of. According to all the evolutionists today, the odds of life forming by accident somewhere at some point in the history of the universe is odds of 1 in a billion. That doesn't mean 2 billion, right? That means a billion times a billion. So we already have 18 zeros on that fraction. 1 in a billion, 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 billion. Billion, 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 billion. I said the word billion 23 times, if you weren't counting. Odds of 1 in 10 to the power of 210. Okay? There's a 1 in a billion chance of evolution happening purely by accident. According to them. Not according to me, according to them. It would be like me saying, imagine if there was 22 of you in this room. Imagine there's only 22 in the room, and I say, you know what? I have an ability to read your mind. I can guess whatever number you're thinking of from 1 to a billion. So you don't believe me, obviously. You say, sure, try, prove yourself. If I go to the first person and think of a number, 1 to a billion, I say, okay, you are thinking of the number 478,293,496. And he says, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. Oh, you think it was luck? I'll do it again. And then again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And how many times do I have to do it before you realize I'm not just taking a lucky guess? There's something else going on here. There's a design. There's got to be a designer. So evolutionists are stuck with the idea that evolution is not a very good explanation for the complexity of life. They can't really say any better than that. That's what they're stuck with. The world is here. Life exists. It must have happened by accident. Yeah, and a hinami. It's very, 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 very unlikely. But that's what we got. That's according to them. So evolution is not at all a kasha on the idea of design and the idea of design. Any questions? That's number one. So any questions on this?
According to them, that the world's here, let's say, for a billion times a billion years.
No, so
that's possible.
No, they'd say the world's been around for 13.4 billion years. And that's just not enough time. It's just not enough time. Say the monkeys give them another few million years, maybe they'll type another sentence. 13.5 billion years is just not enough time to produce something as complex as life. According to them. It's not my calculation. It's their calculation. Multiverse, I'll save it to the end. It's a very, it's a theory that's in a lot of trouble these days. There's zero evidence behind it, actually, literally zero evidence behind it. They develop a theory in a way where their description of it makes it so unprovable there can't be evidence for it. So I look at multiverse as a much bigger leap of faith than just saying God did it. If you want more details afterwards, I'm happy to get into it. Okay, anyway, that's proof number one. I want to get to some more things here. Yeah.
What if life was developed on a meteorite from space and
So I'm saying, not just on Earth, I'm saying the odds of life forming even on a meteorite somewhere in the galaxy by accident at any point. Yeah, I'm including that possibility. Because even on a meteorite, how did the amino acids come together? What was the right energy conditions? How did it form in a way that we could make life reproducible? I'm saying, given all those possibilities, all the space, all the time, all the planets, all the galaxies, there's still not enough to make it likely that life would ever form anywhere by accident. That's again according to their number. I want to go on. I want to get to the two other proofs. We'll take questions at the end. Number two. Number two goes like this. And again, this is the Rambam explaining Avram Avinu. The Rambam says that Avram Avinu looks at the world and makes one basic deduction. His deduction is that everything you observe in our universe seems to follow a basic rule of cause and effect. Everything comes from something, right? I look at a stender that's made out of wood, and I say, this obviously came from a tree. I know wood comes from trees. I look at a tree and I say, okay, so how did the tree get there? You stick around nature for a little while, you realize the trees come from seeds. Good, okay, so where did the seed come from? Stick around, you realize, well, seeds come from a previous generation of trees. Where did those trees come from? Seeds. Which came from trees, which came from seeds, which came from trees, right? Everything is coming from something else. You look at a human being, we come from our parents, we come from their parents, we come from their parents, right? Let's go with evolution for a second. Let's say evolution is right. So we evolved out of the primates, which evolved out of the amphibians, which evolved out of the birds, which evolved out of the worms, which evolved out of the organisms in the primordial soup, which came from this, which came from that, which came from this, which came from that. Evolution is saying cause and effect. Evolution is, the whole statement of evolution is everything comes from something previous. We're agreeing on this point. Everything comes from something, which comes from something, which comes from something, which comes from something. It's all cause and effect. So if everything in the universe seems to follow a law of cause and effect, everything comes from something, so what's the ultimate question you'd have to ask? How'd the whole thing get started? What was there at the beginning? What made the first thing? How'd the whole thing get started? So if you were to ask, again, any scientist today that question, how'd the whole thing get started? So science would say, we figured that out 100 years ago. We know how it got started. It's simple. It started with a Big Bang. Billions of years ago, the entire universe, everything, all of space and time, was all packed into one little particle of energy. The entire universe, all the space, that one little particle of energy. And it exploded, and it expanded, and then it cooled down, and then energy formed into matter, and after a few billion years, the matter formed into life, and then the life became complex, and then the Earth developed, and blah, 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 and here we are. But it all started with that one particle, the singularity. So what's the next question you have to ask them? How'd that get there? What made the first particle? What created that dot of energy? Right? If the rule is that everything comes from something, where did that thing come from? The scientific answer today is, we don't know. Science doesn't know what made the Big Bang. There was a Big Bang, there was a beginning, there was the first particle. What created it, we don't know yet. Now, let's say science comes along in 5 years and says, we figured it out. We found the thing that made the Big Bang. There was this cloud of energy that made a Big Bang. What's the question we'll ask them then? So where did the cloud come from? Well, there was something else before that. So where did that one come from? Well, what about before? Well, something... At the end of the day, you have to start with the question of, how did the whole thing get started? There's anybody know the names of the two guys that won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA in the 1960s? James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA. Okay? Time magazine interviewed them after they won the Nobel Prize. 2 separate interviews. They interviewed Dr. Watson. Now, Watson happens to be Christian, believes in God. So they asked Watson, how do you explain DNA, right? Cellular life, biology, the DNA strand, the whole, how do you explain it? Genetics. So Watson says, to me, it is so, every cell has this whole DNA component. It is so complex, he says, it's a sign of God. It's a sign of God. God must have made DNA. That's what Dr. Watson says. He's a Christian, he believes in God, that's what he says. Then they interview Dr. Crick. Crick, they say, according to your colleague, Dr. Watson, DNA must have come from God. What do you say? Crick says, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't think God made DNA. Interviewer says, okay, then you think it just kind of formed by accident? And Crick says, no way. There's no way something as complex as DNA could ever form by accident. It's impossible. There's no way. And he says, okay, you don't think God did it. You don't think it happened by itself. So where did DNA come from? His answer is, I memorized it because I loved his answer. His answer is, he says, to me, the only reasonable explanation for DNA is it must have been created by aliens in outer space. Aliens made DNA. What's the next question you would have to ask Dr. Crick? Who made the aliens? Meaning all you're doing is you're saying, I can explain this complex thing. It's really simple. It came from another complex thing. Duh. You're not answering the question. So where did that thing come from? What about the one before that? What about the one before that? Once you recognize that there's a finite physical world, right? This universe is finite. It's physical. It has a size. It has an age. It has a weight. It has a shape. It's a big thing. It's a big bunch of stuff. Once you say the universe is a finite physical thing, something other than finite and physical had to create it. Things don't make themselves exist. Right? My watch didn't make itself exist. It was made by a watchmaker who took a bunch of stuff and turned it into a watch. Nothing makes itself exist. I didn't make myself exist. Molecules don't make themselves exist. They come from something else. So the basic point we're saying is everything finite has a source. Everything finite comes from something. The universe itself is finite, so the universe had to come from something else. The only other thing it could possibly come from is the thing that we call infinite. If space and time came into existence, there must be something beyond space and time that created it. If the universe is finite, there must be something else called infinite. If there's a beginning, there must be something called a beginner. I'm saying the same thing in a few different ways. If there's a finite, there must be an infinite. If there's a beginning, there must be a beginner. If there's space and time, there must be something beyond space and time that created it. Seems to be the only answer. Now, what's interesting is, right, the Rambam said this idea, I guess about 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago. You will not find a single scientist or philosopher anywhere in the world who has an alternative explanation of where the universe came from. There's no better. When I say that there's a finite, therefore there's an infinite, I'm not saying that infinite, i.e. God, I'm not saying it's the best answer to the question. I'm saying it's the only possible answer to the question. There can't be another answer. There can't be another answer. Okay. I had once a guy who was doing a master's degree in physics. And he came to Aish, he was a total atheist, really didn't believe in anything. I sat with him for a couple of weeks, and we argued about this stuff back and forth. After 2 weeks, he's like, okay, I get it, you're right, it makes sense, I guess I believe in God. Fine. Goes back, finishes his degree. He contacts me about 3 months later, and he says, Rabbi, I found another explanation. It's not God. I changed my mind again. It's not God. I found another explanation of where everything came from. It's not God. I say, great, what's the answer? Let me hear. I want to see. He says, I'll send you a book written by a physicist who has a whole other explanation of how the universe started. It has nothing to do with God. He sends me a book written by this big Australian professor, scientist. I read the book, and here's how he begins. The scientist begins the book by saying, he says, now that we believe that there was a beginning to the universe, because of the Big Bang, it leads lots of religious people to say, there's a beginning, so there's a beginner. He says, it doesn't have to be God. There's other explanations. I'm thinking, okay, so let's hear your explanation. He goes through many chapters describing possibilities. He gets to the end of the book and he says this. He says, I believe that the best explanation for the beginning of our universe is that it was created by a thing he called it a potential vector field. That's what made this universe, a potential vector field. Now, he doesn't explain exactly what it is. It's kind of hard. It's a vector field, and it's potential. I don't know what that means exactly, but anyway. I wrote the guy a letter. I wrote the professor a letter, and I said, I have one question. Is the potential vector field finite, or is it infinite? I.e., is it finite? Does it have limitations? Is it made up of things? Does it follow laws of nature? Does it have any limitations? Because if it's finite, then, what's the question? Something must have made the potential vector field. And if you say it's infinite, unlimited, all-powerful, beyond time and space, no limitations, then what's he basically saying? It's another name for God. If it's finite, it's not the answer. if it's infinite, it's the answer we said 3,000 years ago. So he never wrote back to me. But the professor himself wrote another book like 3 years later, and he sent me a copy in the mail. And he inscribed it as, "Dear Rabbi Zeldman, please just read the introduction to my new book." I'm like, okay. He starts the introduction by saying, he says, "I've come to realize that my theory of the potential vector field has certain logical difficulties." Now, I'm sure I'm not the only guy in the world who pointed it out. It's a kind of obvious point, right? So he goes on to the introduction. He says, "It seems right now like the only explanation for our universe is that there must be an infinite God that created it. But maybe one day we'll find a better answer." And I'm like, you still don't get it. What do you mean? Whatever answer you come up with, I'm going to send you the same letter in the mail. Is this thing finite or is it infinite? If it's finite, it's not the answer. Finite things come from things. If it's infinite, it's just another name for God. You don't want to call it God, call it something else. I don't care what you call it. Finite can't explain the world. Only infinite can explain the world. There can't be a third answer. You hear the point? Make sense? Now, there's really two difficulties with this that I want to briefly cover before we get to the next point. There's two difficulties that people have with this idea. Number one is the classic question, so who made God? You say everything comes from something, which comes from... So God had to come from something else? How is God the answer? God also has to come from something. Second question, not really a question, even second difficulty people have is that the idea we're posing of who this infinite being is really a very abstract idea. You think about it. We're saying that there's an infinite thing that created us. This infinite thing is beyond space, beyond time, has no shape, has no size. Like what is it? Where is it? It's a very hard idea to grasp. Not a kasha. It's a hard idea to grasp. Let's go through these 2 points quickly. So again, the two questions, number one are, who made God? Number two, how do you explain what God is? Who made God? I was putting my kids to bed one night, and I have a routine I do with my kids before I put them to bed. Is we do a little Q&A session. I ask them questions, they ask me questions, they want hard questions, we do riddles and puzzles. So I'm putting my daughter to bed one night. She was about 5 years old, and my daughter says, "Abba," no, she was a little older, she was probably 7 or 8 years old. She says, "Abba, tonight ask me a really hard question." I said, okay. I go to the kitchen, I get an apple, I bring it to her bed, and I say, "Esty, where did the apple come from?" She says, "The kitchen." I said, okay, that's not what I meant. Where did the apple really get? She's like, "I don't know." I said, "Well, it grew on a tree, and trees come from Hashem, right? So the apple was really made by Hashem." She's very cute. She's like, "Hashem made this apple?" I'm like, "Yeah, you can touch it. Nothing's going to happen." Hashem makes lots of things. I say, "Esty, who made the fan?" So she looks at it and she says, "Hashem." I said, "No, God doesn't make fans." The fan was made by a person. Some things are made by people, some things are made by Hashem. Now, at her age, for a 6, 7-year-old, that's a chiddush, right? She's never thought of it that way. So, like Esty, who made water? She says, Hashem. Very good. Who made this building? A person. Very good. Who made water? Hashem. Who made air? Hashem. Who made this table? The person. Right? She gets it. Say, Esty, now I'm going to ask you the hard question. Where does milk come from? So she looks at me and she says, Hashem. I said, no. She says, a person? I said, no. Now she's stuck. So she says, so Abba, so where does milk come from? I said, well, you know where milk comes from, right? She says, no. Where does milk come from? I said, well, you never taught you, you know who makes milk? She's like, no, Abba, I don't know. I said, honey, it comes from a cow. She goes, what? A cow makes milk? I'm like, yeah. You know that whole baggy thing at the bottom with all those things sticking out? You squeeze those things and milk comes out. So she's a little girl. She's like, ew, gross. Milk comes from cows. I'm not going to drink milk anymore. So, okay, yeah, milk comes from cows. But who made cows? Where do cows come from? She says, Hashem. I say, very good. Hashem made cows in a way that they make milk. And even, my watch, it's made out of metal. It's like Hashem made all the things that made my watch. He made the metal, he made the glass, he made the plastic. It's all stuff in the ground that we turned into other stuff, and we made things out of it. Really, this was my punchline, really everything comes from Hashem. Gave her a kiss goodnight. She goes to sleep. I go to the kitchen. I'm sitting eating my dinner. And about 15 minutes goes by. Esty comes out to the kitchen. She looks at me and she says, Abba, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, honey, go ahead. She says, and I thought she was about to say, where do I come from? And I'm like, I'm not sure, go ask Ema. She says, Abba, if everything comes from Hashem, then where does Hashem come from? Not bad for a 6-year-old, right? I say, Esty, that's a great question. The Rambam asks that question. The Rambam wrote more Nevuchim. He's got chapters where he deals with that question. It's a great question. I'm going to give you a really easy answer, because it's past your bedtime. The answer is, Hashem doesn't have to come from something. That's why he's Hashem. She looks at me and she goes, okay, good night. Now, it sounds like a cop-out answer, frankly. Hashem's different. You don't ask that question about God. He's different. He doesn't have to come. Everything else has to come from something, but don't ask about God. He just doesn't have to. But the truth is, what we're saying essentially is this. We're saying infinite and finite are really two different things. Finite has rules. Finite follows a rule called cause and effect. Finite things have colors. Finite things have shapes. Finite things have weight. Infinite created that system. So because infinite created the system of finite, infinite doesn't follow the rules of finite. In other words, I know it's a bit of a difficult idea, but let's go through it for a second. If I was to ask you the question, what shape is God? What's the actual answer to that question? What shape is God? The answer is it's a stupid question. God doesn't have a shape. Physical things have a shape. It's like saying, what color are the elections? Or what shape are the elections? There's no shape, right? Physical things have a shape. Okay, what color is God? Stupid question. God is beyond color. Physical things have a color, right? This is what color. This is a color. Everything is a color. What color is the number 3? There's no such thing. What color is morality? Like, physical things have colors. So, what shape is God? Silly question. What color is God? How heavy is God? Are questions that apply to physical that don't apply to non-physical. So the question, what caused God? Where does God come from? Is another example of a question that's physical that doesn't apply to non-physical things. What color is God? Silly question. What shape is God? Silly. How much does God weigh? Silly question. Is God a he or a she? Silly question. Is my watch a he or a she? There's no such thing. Well, I guess in Hebrew there is. That's a different point. Anyway, my watch doesn't have a gender, right? My watch is a physical thing. God is beyond the system of physical, so God is beyond the idea of cause and effect. Again, it's a difficult idea because we're used to understanding physical things. There's no difficulty logically with saying that infinite doesn't follow the rules of finite, and therefore infinite doesn't have to have a cause. Are we okay with that idea? Okay. We can go. We spent a lot of time on this, but I want to get to the main point here. Now, the more we think about this, the more we realize that this thing that we call infinite is a really hard idea. Like, what does God look like? What shape is he? What color is he? Where is he? What does he mean he's beyond space and time? These are all impossible ideas for us to wrap our heads around. My grandson asked me. My grandson's 5. My grandson says, Zaidi, what does Hashem look like? I said, he doesn't look like anything. He's Hashem. So my grandson says, yeah, you just don't know what he looks like. I'm like, no, I'm telling you. He doesn't look like anything because God doesn't have a look. God doesn't have a shape. God doesn't have a size. It's a very abstract idea. It's a hard idea for us to wrap our heads around. So I was teaching this idea downstairs. We have a drop-in program here called Essentials on the main floor. I was giving over this idea to a group of beginners, and one guy in the class was very bothered. About 20 guys in the class. One guy was really bothered. He says, Rabbi, listen, you want to tell me that the idea of God is logical, there's evidence, it's rational, I see the logic, but I can't imagine God. I can't picture God. You can't really define God. There's no way of imagining what God is. I don't know where to go with that. How am I supposed to believe in something if I don't even know what the thing is? So I said, listen, there's things we know exist, even though I can't picture them. I can't imagine them. They're beyond the physical. I still know that they're there because logic tells me. Anyway, he didn't like my answer. We're having a whole debate in class. We're going back and forth. He was really troubled by the idea. And then literally in the middle of class, the door opens up in the back, and the guy comes walking in the room who was blind. A guy with a white cane comes walking into the room, takes a seat at the back. And for 5 minutes he's sitting there listening to me have this whole debate with the student. And then the blind guy puts up his hand, and he says, Rabbi, I can explain exactly what the trouble is. I said, go ahead. He says, I've been blind my whole life. I was born blind. So I know what round means, and smooth, and straight, and square, and rough, and I get that. But when people say that things have a color, I have no idea what they're talking about. You want to say this tie has blue on it? You want to tell me the wall is brown? But it's brown? What does the word brown even mean? He says, people say the sky is blue, right? I get it. There's a thing called a sky, and it goes on and on. I can imagine that. But blue? What do you mean by blue? What does the word blue mean? I believe the grass is green. Everyone in the world says the grass is green. There must be a thing called green, that's the color of the grass. I don't know what it means. I know it's true. He says our problem is we're so stuck in a world of finite that we can't imagine infinite. We're all kind of blind because we're stuck in finite. We can't imagine things that are infinite. So the whole class looks at this guy and just goes, whoa. And the guy got up and walked out of the room. I think that was the proof of God right there. I've never seen the guy since. He had a little Elio Hanavi moment, gave his 5-minute little speech. I've been using it ever since because it actually happened to me. And that's exactly the point we're saying here. I know that it's true because logic leads me to that conclusion. There's no other possible explanation for finite other than saying something other than finite made it. If there's a finite, there's an infinite. Can't imagine it? Of course you can't. The definition of God is that it's unimaginable. It's beyond the physical. It has no shape. It has no size. It has no color. It has no weight. It makes it unimaginable, but it doesn't make it illogical. The blind guy is not going to say, I've never seen blue, so blue doesn't exist. He's going to say, I'm blind. That's why I don't see blue, but I know there's a thing called blue. I have no doubt about it. You ask anybody who's the world the color of the sky, they'll say blue. There must be a thing called blue. Your logic tells you there's a thing called infinite. There's a thing called infinite, even if you can't imagine it. We okay with that idea? Okay. We have 15 minutes to get through one more big idea here. So proof number 1, design and designer. Proof number 2 is what we call the first cause proof of God. There's a beginning, so there's a beginner. Number 3 is a whole different mahalach. I'll give it to you like this. This one is more intuitive. You have to sort of feel this one out a little bit. Let's imagine that you finish shir tonight, you leave late at night, you're walking on your way back to yeshiva, and you're walking down some corner street and you hear some screaming noises. Some old lady screaming, you know what's going on, you're scared, you run over there, you see this lady, this older lady, sitting by an ATM machine. She just pulled out a bunch of cash. And there's some young guy beating her up, smashing her, grabbing her purse, trying to take all the money she has. And you're horrified. You take a brick, you throw it at the guy, you knock him out, she runs away, you saved her life. You call the cops, this guy's like this, you're sitting there, you call the cops, waiting for the cops to show up, pick up this guy. So imagine this guy says to you, he says, I don't get it. Why are you stopping me? What's it your business that I want to beat up old ladies and steal their money? I do this every night. This is my income. I work 2 hours a night, beat up about 3 ladies a night. I make an average of about 5,000 shekels a night, tax-free. I'm having a good life here, and you totally got in my way. Why? And you say to him, because you're an evil scumbag. That's why. Because you shouldn't do things like that. He says, well, what's wrong with it? He said, what do you mean what's wrong with it? You're beating up an old lady, stealing your money. How is it not obvious to you that that's wrong? He says, well, tell me. What's wrong with it? I know you don't like it. I know you disapprove. I get it. You're obviously upset at me. But what's actually wrong with me beating up old ladies and stealing their money? So what answer do you think you could give this person to convince them that it's actually the wrong thing to do to hurt people and take their money? What's actually wrong about it? I know it sounds kind of obvious. Let's play it up. What's actually wrong? Yeah.
God created morals and
Okay, so let's see. We're talking on an atheist level right now. Can we find a way of defining it as evil without bringing God into the picture? Can it actually be wrong without saying God is what deems it as wrong? That's really the question. Yeah.
The same way you wouldn't want someone doing it to him, you should do something else.
So the rule in life should be that I'm only allowed to do things to people if they're the kind of things I'd want them to do to me. Who says that's the rule? I mean, it sounds kind of nice and, equality and all that stuff, but maybe the rule in life is I can do it as long as I get away with it. Who made up the rule that you can only do things to people that you don't? Who says life is supposed to be fair, basically? It might be your opinion. It might be a rule you would like to live by or you would like society to live by. It doesn't make it true. It's just your own version of what you think morality should be. Yeah?
Last
way society has been evolved in the sense that still society has, the rules of society are there. Still is bad, having someone is bad. That's just the way we're raising.
Good. Okay, so we're raising right now kind of two possible answers. Let's actually put them down. The first reason you might call it wrong is you're just saying on a personal level, you think it's wrong. And because you think it's wrong, I can't do it. Which is kind of silly if you think about it. If it's just your opinion versus mine, it doesn't make it actually wrong. You have an opinion, I have an opinion. You have a right to your opinion, I have a right to my opinion. If the only thing wrong with it is you don't like it, it doesn't make it not right. It just means you don't like it. I have a friend I went out for ice cream with a while ago. We were sitting in a cafe on a Motzei Shabbos. We both ordered a bowl of strawberry ice cream. He told the waiter to come over and he ordered a cup of tahina to put on his ice cream. So he's pouring tahina all over the ice cream. I'm looking at this guy like, you are gross. Tahina on strawberry ice cream? Like on chocolate ice cream, maybe I could hear it. But on strawberry, that's disgusting. He says, Moshe, you don't like it, don't eat it. It's my ice cream. I can do whatever I want with it. You don't like beating up old ladies, so don't do it. I can't do it because you don't like it? That's kind of silly. If the only thing wrong with it is you don't like it, you have no right to impose your personal values on me and tell me I can't do it. So second answer is, it's not just you, your idea, it's social. Society decides morality. It's not wrong because you personally don't like it. It's wrong because our whole society has a rule that we've all agreed to that says you don't go around beating up and hurting innocent people. What makes it wrong? Society says it's wrong. It's wrong because society has made up rules. What's wrong with saying that society is the source of what's right and wrong? What's difficult about that?
Society decides it's correct to beat up old ladies, your argument falls away.
Good. So are there any examples of a society that even an atheist would say are bad societies? Atheists ever disagree with other societies?
Yeah.
Most atheists don't like ISIS going around beheading people. Most atheists don't think Nazi Germany was a particularly good idea. Even Jewish atheists, especially Jewish atheists. Most atheists don't think that racism is a good thing, even in societies that are full of racism. Meaning, anytime you're willing to label a society as bad, if society is bad, it means society doesn't get to decide what's good and bad. You're saying, no, there's some higher value. There's things that are right and wrong, that society can be a good or a bad society. Which means it's not decided by you, not decided by society. Otherwise, let the Nazis do what they want. That's what they believe in. No, they're wrong. Well, who says? What makes them wrong? Your society is different than theirs, so yours is right and theirs is wrong. Like, where did that come from? There's a famous case of this I like to say over that. I read this in a book many years ago. This professor, it's a true story, professor in Chicago was giving a class to a group of college students about morality and about society and about different values. And anyway, the students in class were saying, listen, it's all relative, and you can't judge another society by your standards. It's very politically incorrect to do, who's right and who's wrong. Everyone has their own values, and it's all relative, and it's all subjective. Anyway, the professor says, listen, there's things that are right and things that are wrong. And all these liberal students were saying, no, it's all relative, it all depends on where you come from, there's no ultimate right and wrong, and whatever. So the professor asks the students this question. He says, let's imagine you are a British soldier stationed in India in the 1940s. Okay, India was under British control until 1947. You're a British soldier stationed in India, a little Hindu village somewhere in the mountains of India. These Hindus, these very religious Hindus, you're the soldier guarding this village. You see the Hindus get together one day, build a big bonfire in the village. You don't know what's going on. You've never seen this before. You've never been to India before. You don't know what's going on. I think it's a holiday or something. Then you see they go to a little hut. They take a man who had died, an older man, and they're dragging him over to the fire. So you say to these Hindus, like, what are you guys doing? And they say, our Hindu religion teaches us that when a man dies, the only way his soul can go to heaven is you have to burn his body on a fire. Now, you think it's kind of gross. You've never seen that. They don't do that in London, right? But okay, listen, that's what they believe. Who am I to judge? That's fine. So they go ahead, they burn the body. Smoke and the smell and everything else, but you're not going to judge them. Then they go back into the hut. They take out the man's wife, the widow. They're taking her to the fire. There's only one problem. What's the problem? She's alive. They're dragging her to the fire, and she's saying, help, save me, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. So you say to the Hindus, like, what are you guys doing now? And they say, Hinduism teaches us that when a man dies and goes to heaven, his wife has to go at the same time. So the practice in Hinduism is, we burn widows alive. They actually do. I'm not making this up. It's illegal in modern-day India, but Hinduism for thousands of years had a practice of burning women alive. They're dragging this woman to the fire. She doesn't want to die. So the professor asks the class, he says, what would you do? You could either shoot your gun in the air, scare them all away and save her life, or you can say to yourself, who am I to judge these Hindus by my Western standards? Yes, it's true, in England we don't burn women alive, but okay, that's just my society. Their society does burn women alive. Who am I to say there's anything wrong with that? He asks the class, how many of you would just stand there and let this woman be burned to death? Nobody put up their hands. How many of you would shoot your gun in the air and scare them away? And basically say, the Western values are good and Hindu's values are bad. Nobody put up their hands. So he says to the class, like it's one or the other. Either you save her life or you don't. What would you do? He says the class had a 45-minute debate about what they would do in that situation. He said at the end of the 45 minutes, the whole class all agreed. They all came to the same conclusion. You know what their conclusion was? That the English shouldn't have been in India. Problem solved. Now, this question is going to be very irritating for any liberal student you ever meet. Because they all want to say, of course society decides values. No, but you can't do that. You can't burn. Well, why not? That's what society wants. Nazis decide to kill Jews. Hindus decide to burn women alive. ISIS wants to go around beheading people. Oh, you don't like that? You think it's actually wrong? Well, then society doesn't decide morality, and neither do you. So what does? What decides? It's not the individual. It's not society. What makes anything wrong? What's wrong with me beating up old ladies and stealing their money? It's not that you don't like it. It's not that society has rules against it. So what's actually wrong? So the third answer people often give is it's global. It's not me. It's not my society. It's the world. Since most of the world thinks that burning women alive is bad, that's what makes it bad. Since most of the world believes that Nazism is wrong, that's what makes it wrong. Since most of the world doesn't beat up old ladies in the ATM machines, so therefore it's wrong. It's not me. It's not one. And it's not any one group. It's the sentiment of the whole world's morality. Whatever most of the world believes is wrong, that's what's kovea, what's right and wrong. What's wrong with that argument?
Why does he have to be subjected to the world's opinion?
Exactly. It's really just the same. So most of the world believes in something, therefore I can't do what I want. I actually read an article in an airline magazine. I read an actual article that said, they interviewed people all around the world. They said that 52% of travelers, this is an actual statistic, 52% of travelers steal towels from hotels. Now when I read that, I didn't think, oh, good, now it's okay. I thought, no, 52% of people are just doing something wrong. Even if it was 80%, it doesn't now become okay. It means people think it's okay. It's still wrong. Right? If the Nazis, Chas v'shalom, won the war and the world was 60% Nazi, we wouldn't say, okay, we better turn ourselves in. The Nazis are right. No, it means 60% of the world is wrong. So if we're willing to call anything wrong, it's not because of me or you. It's not because of our society. It's not what most of the world happens to think. There must be something else that decides morality. There must be some other source for it. Can you imagine any other possibility? If you look at all the new atheists today, like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, they have a whole different argument that goes beyond all these, and they would say it's called genetics. Why is it wrong for me to beat up old ladies? Why is it wrong to burn women alive in India? Because genetically we are programmed to help the human species survive. We feel bad when we hurt people. We feel bad when we steal. We feel bad when we create insecurity in the world. We feel bad when we kill people. Why? Because it goes against your genetic desire to propagate the human species. It's bad for human survival when people are violent. So it's not society. It's not. It feels bad, and it feels bad because genetically we're programmed not to do things like that. You know, we all feel bad when we do things that are wrong. Why do we feel bad? Because genetically you're programmed not to do things that are wrong. You're not to do things that are going to hurt other human beings. It's wrong because your genes say so. It's wrong because your genes give you the feelings of being, finding it distasteful to hurt other human beings. Genetics. So what's wrong with that argument? It's wrong because your genes make you feel strong. So animals do have, actually. Animals, meaning animals for sure have it. Animals will kill other species but not their own species. Animals will generally abide by some level of morality that's good for their own species to survive. Right? Lions have dogs, cats have no problems killing small animals. They wouldn't kill of their own because they want their species to survive. So we do the same thing. Huh? Say again?
Maybe people don't consume it.
Among human beings?
Yeah.
We kill the weak and the oppressed. We kill the ones we can get away with killing. Right? I beat up the old ladies at the ATM machine. I'm not going to beat some guy coming home from a gym because he's stronger than me. We do pick on people that are smaller than us, weaker than us, because we'll be able to get away with what we want. But we feel bad about it because of our genes. So the simple argument is this, if you think about it. The simple argument is, just because your genes give you a feeling of something, who says you got to listen to your genes? No, you can't do it because your genes are going to make you feel bad. Okay, so I'll feel bad. Can I not feel bad if I want to feel bad? Right? My genes tell me to eat. If I want to lose weight and ignore my genes and starve for a couple of days, am I allowed to do that? Who says you got to listen to your genetics? No, you feel bad, so you can't do it. So I feel like feeling bad. What's wrong with feeling bad? If I'll make enough money, I don't mind feeling bad. We make that decision all the time. Anytime we do an Aveira, that's what we're doing. I know it's going to feel bad, but heck, it's worth it, at least for now. I might change my mind tomorrow morning and have harata, but in the meantime, I don't mind overcoming my feelings. If all it is feelings, who says you got to go with your feelings? So none of these really end up being an actual reason why things are actually right and wrong. If your argument to me, why I can't beat up the old ladies, is going to feel bad, okay, so it feels bad. I don't mind feeling bad. No, you can't do it because it feels bad. Who says? All of these ultimately remit to saying, so who says? Okay, so I'll tell you something, I'll just end on this point. It comes out really, if you think about it, that since none of these are a source of morality, but we still believe that it's wrong for me to beat the old lady, and we still believe it's wrong for Hindus to go around throwing women into fires, there must be something else beyond all of this that actually makes it wrong, and that's what we call God. There must be something beyond human opinion that's the source of what defines an act as good or evil. Now, I'm not saying at all, I'm not saying what good and evil are. We're not going to argue here, is abortion okay, is slavery okay, is capital punishment okay, is same-sex marriage okay? I'm not getting into the specifics. But what I am saying is on any issue that you want to decide if something is right or wrong, you first have to know that there's a thing called right and wrong. There's no point in me arguing with somebody at an abortion clinic about whether I get an abortion or not without agreeing that one of us is wrong. Either it's okay or it's not okay. That's only possible if there's a God. With no God, we're a bunch of animals. We have our feelings, we have our instincts, we have our desires, we have our social rules, we try not to get caught. Everything is really okay. I mean, the point we're making, just to summarize it quickly, the point I'm making here essentially is, if you believe in good and evil, if you actually believe it's wrong for me to beat up the old lady, or you believe it's wrong to behead people, like ISIS does, if you believe it's wrong, if you believe in good and evil, then it really means you believe in God. You can't have a sense of good and evil without believing in God. Any atheist who ever says, yeah, the Nazis were wrong, or the Hindus are wrong, or it's wrong to beat up old ladies, if it's really wrong, then it basically means you believe in God. Just 1 minute. So I'll tell you what happens occasionally. I'll end on this point. It happens occasionally when I really push this point on people. I had this a couple of months ago. I was making this point in a class to a group of guys. There was one guy in the class who was a really strong atheist. He really didn't believe in this. And he says, Rabbi, you convinced me. You convinced me that if I believe in good and evil, it means I believe in God. But you know what? I'm so sure there's no God that all you've really convinced me of is there's no good and evil. There's nothing actually wrong with anything because I don't believe in God. Like, murder isn't really wrong. Like, it feels bad because I was raised that way and I might get caught and go to jail because society made rules about it. But be'etzem, if I don't believe in God, there's nothing wrong with anything. Murder's okay. Rape is okay. Dealing with, everything is really okay. I'm like, oh gosh. I didn't convince this guy to believe in God. I convinced him not to believe in good and evil anymore. There's really nothing wrong with anything. So I asked him a question. I said, okay, you really don't believe there's anything wrong with anything? So what if I could offer you right now? I'm going to take out a suitcase. I have here $100,000 cash. Okay, here's my offer. I'm going to give you a handgun. I want you to leave this building, go into the Rova, kill the first religious Jew you see. And I will give you $100,000 cash. There's no cops around. I paid off all the police. There's no video cameras. I guarantee you won't get caught. $100,000 cash, kill a total stranger. There's nothing really wrong with it, according to you, so go for it. Would you do it? He said, no, I couldn't do that. I said, why not? He says, because it just feels so bad. It's okay. It's just a feeling. There's nothing actually wrong with it. There's nothing actually wrong with it. Go for it. He says, no, I couldn't. I said, well, why not? He says, because I just feel, okay, but your feelings are getting away $100,000. What if I made it $1 million? Would you do it then? No, I still couldn't. It would just feel terrible. Hurting an innocent person like that, it just feels so wrong. I say, but according to you, there's nothing really wrong. He says, you're right. It's not actually wrong, but it just feels so wrong that I couldn't do it. I've been so conditioned to feel bad that I will feel bad even though there's nothing actually wrong with it. I said, okay, I have a solution for you. What if I gave you something called an amorality pill? An amorality pill, you take this pill, you will never feel bad about any act of evil you ever do. You'll never have no guilt at all, no bad feelings at all. You'll be able to get away with it. You can rape people, you can murder people, you can steal from people, and you'll never feel bad. Take the pill, $100,000. You're scot-free, go for it. He says, I couldn't do it. I said, why not? He says, it just feels so wrong. I'm like, so what? Why would your feelings get in the way of making $100,000, man? Like, you're crazy. Take the pill and your life is set. You can commit any crime you want and never have to worry about anything. He says, there's just something wrong with it. Once you hit that point of saying, yeah, there's just something wrong with it, what you're saying is, it's because there's a real right and wrong. And if there's a real right and wrong, it has to be because there's a God. Without God, nothing matters. Nothing makes any difference. Nothing wrong with anything. You hear the point? I'll just say I did have one. I've used this argument on many atheists. There was once a guy in my Aish class that said, in the middle of class, he says, you know what? He says, I would take that pill. He actually said it. He said, I would take that pill. I said, you know what? You take this pill, you're going to be able to rape people and kill people and hurt people and scam people. He said, yeah, I would do it, no problem. All the other guys in the class were like, this guy's dangerous. Like, he really, really doesn't have any problems hurting people. So I said to him, listen, I think you're a bit of a psychopath. I don't know what to tell you. I can't prove you wrong. I think you're not thinking so straight. Anyway, I didn't end up convincing him. That night he called me. Like 11 o'clock at night he calls me. He says, Rabbi, I've been thinking about it. I've been lying in here in bed thinking about it. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't take the pill. I said, why not? He says, there's just something wrong with it. You're right, it's called God. If you're stopping yourself, it's because deep down you know there's a thing called God. Okay, we're out of time. I'm sorry. Rabbi Zait, you're off. Thank you very much.